So ham radio, another word for amateur radio, non-commercial radio communication. It's a hobby. It's got technology, community and public service sort of bound up in it. And I thought it had more or less disappeared. Well, it's governed by international treaty. And this is the bit that always gets to me. They need to obtain a license by passing a government test demonstrating technical radio knowledge and an understanding of regulation. So why is it called ham? Is that the professional radio operators used to think the amateur ones were kind of rather poor at doing Morse code. It was first used in 1844 with the famous message, "What hath God wrought?" Spelt correctly. But that was done via wire. Marconi, I think, real pioneer in this. He was a really good publicist. So foundations were laid by Marconi, brought up in Italy, obviously, and moved into London when he was 21 in 1896. And it led to the practical wireless telegraph system by 1895. And so his mother thought he'd have a better chance of getting more people's interest by coming to this country, so they moved there. But his mother was Annie Jameson. What do you think, what firm might she have been connected with?
Irish whiskey.
Yes. Through her contacts that he was able to get support for what he was doing. You can see his equipment there. He created one that could send electrical signals using radio waves traveling through the air rather than through wires. So that was his big innovation. He started up a company in 1897 called the named Marconi Wireless Company. And that's what him sitting in a radio room in 1922. He was a fascist. In 1923, he joined the National Fascist Party. In 1930, Benito Mussolini appointed him president of the Royal Academy of Italy, which made Marconi a member of the Fascist Grand Council. Here's another of his memorials. It looks a bit like the Rolls-Royce one, doesn't it? It's in Washington, D.C. So there are memorials everywhere to him. He also got the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1909.
Why is the memorial a naked lady? What's that got to do with radio?
You're quite right, Sandy. Why on earth it's like that, I've no idea. And this is just saying, from Morse code to music, the London Radio Dance Band were often on 2LO, London. It's interesting, radio immediately got on to other things than they expected, and one of which was broadcast radio. It was on November 14th, November 6 p.m., the BBC announced, "This is 2LO, Marconi House, London calling." It was the identification number granted by the General Post Office for its radio broadcasting license. Just bringing it up to date, one of the things that amateur radio operators don't like are people they call whackers. But it's people who dress up their cars looking like police or some sort of auxiliary force, who pick up on all the calls and start interfering with it. But the number of ham radio operators in 2024, there were nearly 750,000 amateur radio operators in the States, and there are about 3 million active amateur radio operators worldwide. Who would have thought that? Where do they all hide? Japan has got the second highest number of operators. China reports 240,000, and I looked up the UK figures, and there are approximately 100,000 amateur radio licenses issued by Ofcom in the United Kingdom. So the numbers remained relatively stable in the UK, but apparently there's now, in February of this year, there were new amendments made to the radio licenses to provide greater operating freedoms and streamlining the licensing process for amateur radio enthusiasts. Now is your time to get involved. I think this is part of all the government strategy to encourage technological innovation, get those amateur radio operators on the go. So the 1920s, 1930s were the golden age of ham. They began forming clubs and organizations and had a key role in advancing radio technology. And those are their QL cards that they distribute to each other. You can see the kind of equipment that people have got. It looks pretty complicated to me. World War II was interesting, and so were the Falkland Isles. In the World War II, They're recruited by the military, especially in America, to serve as operators and technicians. And it was their expertise was used for communication, espionage, and intelligence gathering. The US military even have a service called MARS, Military Affiliated Radio Services, used extensively in both Gulf Wars and is run by the Air Force and Army and manned by civilian amateur radio operators. And of course, in the Falklands War, which I think was in 1982, Bob McLeod, an amateur radio operator, was contacted by the troops because 19 of them had been killed and they couldn't get any messages back to their families. He managed to get his remaining kit that hadn't been confiscated by the Argentinians, to get it up and running, to get messages home to their loved ones. Each message always saying the same, "I am safe." And he'd ring them up. Somebody in England would ring them up. Now, famous radio amateurs. Who'd have thought that Marlon Brando was an amateur radio operator with a call sign FO5GJ? I'm sure he said it far better than that. There's another one, Yuri Gagarin. And most astronauts are licensed amateur radio operators. Rockall. Well, do you know what Rockall is?
The weather forecast.
That's it. That's Rockall. It's not very big, is it? But no. Belgian radio enthusiasts succeeded in their attempt to broadcast from Rockall. It's 100 foot wide and 70 feet high, and a 250-mile boat trip from Stornoway on the Western Islands. The two made it onto the rock and were transmitting overnight using amateur radio equipment. Apparently, the UK annexed Rockall in 1955. We did a Trump on Greenland. We just went there and got it and said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry, you seagulls. It's now British." Apparently, its ownership is still disputed, but it's got a very appropriate name, Rockall. You know. Ham radio in times of crisis. Well, during the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, hams, in East and West Germany, communicated to share real-time updates. During the COVID epidemic, they provided communication support for remote communities and medical facilities. And during Hurricane Katrina, ham operators provided emergency communications when all the traditional infrastructure failed. And finally, let's not forget Tony Hancock.
Marconi was very keen, wasn't he, to sell, because he was manufacturing radios. And at the start of broadcasting, he had this brilliant idea that he would employ Dame Nellie Melba to sing over the airwaves. And it was Ed Burrows, actually, who you mentioned earlier, who finally persuaded the Dame to come and sing. And she did this walk round, and Ed Burrows said he was showing her the radio masts outside. And Lady Melba turned to him and said, "Young man, if you think I'm going to climb up there and sing, you're very much mistaken."
Okay, see you all soon.